The ruins did not want to be found. That was how Darian Cole always thought about dead places. They did not fight back. They did not warn you away. They just sat there, buried under centuries of silence, and made themselves as difficult as possible. Orvith 9 was no different. The dust here was fine and pale, the color of old bone, and it got into everything. The folds of his suit, the seams of his boots, the corners of his scanning visor. The dead city of the Vethrani spread out in every direction, half swallowed by the ground, its tall, narrow towers broken like teeth. Darian worked alone. That was his choice, and he liked it. Survey work paid well when you were good at it, and he was good at it. You walked the grid. You took your readings. You marked your data. You did not need anyone else for that. He had been out for 3 hours when he heard it the first time. A small click. Behind him, like a pebble shifted by something with weight. He stopped walking. He stood still and listened. The low-gravity moon had no wind worth mentioning. His suit filtered out his own breathing. The ruins were completely silent. He kept walking. The click came again, then 2 more in quick succession. Something small and careful, moving across the stone behind him. He did not spin around. He had learned long ago that sudden movements ruined everything. Instead, he slowed his pace, watched his own shadow stretch long and pale across the dust, and counted his steps. At 10 steps he stopped. He tilted his head and listened. Silence. He took 5 more steps. Stopped again. Click, click, pause, click. He turned around slowly. There was nothing there, just broken columns and dust, and the long, straight shadows of the ruins cutting across the ground. He scanned left, then right. His visor showed no heat signatures, no movement. Whatever it was, if it was anything at all, it had gone still. Darian stood there for a moment. He considered the possibility that the ruins were settling. Old structures shifted sometimes, especially in low gravity, especially in temperature cycles. That was the reasonable explanation. He marked it in his head as probably nothing and turned back around. He took 3 steps. Something moved at the edge of his vision. Fast, low to the ground, gone behind a fallen column before he could fix his eyes on it. He stopped again. His heart was doing something a little quicker than normal. Very slowly, he turned his head toward the column. It was about 12 meters away. The top half had sheared off and lay crumbled a few meters past it. The standing base was maybe a meter high, pale stone carved with the thin vertical lines the Vethrani had used on everything. Decorative, the xenoarchaeologists thought, or possibly a writing system no one had decoded yet. Nothing was visible behind it. But something was there. He could feel it the way you feel eyes on the back of your neck. Not threatening, just watching. He crouched down. He made himself as small and unthreatening as a man in a full environment suit could manage, which was not very small, but he tried. He did not move any closer. He just waited. For a long time nothing happened. Then, from behind the base of the column, a small head appeared. It was the size of a large cat's head, roughly, though nothing about it looked like a cat. The skull was narrow and angular, the jaw long. The eyes were enormous, deep amber in color, reflective, currently fixed on him with an expression that could only be described as terrified and furious in equal measure. The scales across the face were pale gold, catching what light filtered through the moon's thin atmosphere, and 2 small curved structures rose from behind the ears like the beginning of horns that had not quite finished growing. Darian did not move. He did not speak. He did not reach for his scanner. The creature stared at him. Every muscle in its small body was tensed, ready to vanish. It had clearly not expected him to crouch down. It had not expected him to stay still. Some calculation was happening behind those amber eyes, some very old, very careful weighing of whether this large, unfamiliar thing was going to lunge. He did not lunge. He sat in the dust of the dead city and waited. After a long moment, something changed in the creature's posture. The absolute terror softened, just slightly, into something more like wariness. It did not come closer, but it did not run. Then it made a sound. Low, involuntary, quickly cut off, like it had not meant to make any noise at all and was annoyed with itself for the slip. A sound like the single resonant hum of a struck bell. Darian sat in the dust for 2 more hours. The creature watched him from behind the column the entire time, appearing and disappearing, always returning. It could not seem to decide whether he was dangerous or simply very strange. When he finally stood to go back to his ship, He moved slowly, gave the column a wide berth, and did not look directly at it as he passed. He filed his mineral survey that evening. Standard data. Nothing unusual. He said nothing about the creature. He lay awake in his bunk for a long time, staring at the ceiling of the Callaway, thinking about amber eyes and pale gold scales and the very particular sound a frightened thing makes when it forgets to be silent. In the morning, he went back. He brought food rations. On the second day, she let him get within 4 meters. On the third day, she ate the ration bar he left on the ground and retreated back behind the column to finish it, watching him over the edge the entire time like she expected him to try something clever. He did not try anything clever. He sat in the dust and read survey reports on his visor until the light shifted. On the fourth day, she sniffed his boot. He did not look down when she did it. He kept his eyes forward, kept his breathing even, and let her take her time. The sniff was brief and cautious. Then she stepped back. Then she came forward and sniffed the boot again, longer this time. On the fifth day, she ate from his open palm. Her nose touched his glove first, cold even through the material, testing the smell of the food and the smell of him with equal seriousness. Then her tongue, long and pale, forked at the tip, flicked out once. Then she ate. Her teeth were small and very sharp, and she was extremely careful not to nick his fingers, which he suspected was deliberate. When she finished, she sat back on her haunches and looked up at him. And then something happened that had no entry in any survey manual Darien had ever read. He felt a pressure at the back of his skull. Not painful, not even uncomfortable, just a presence, like a warm hand placed gently against the outside of a window. Then it moved inward, not aggressively, more like a question being asked very quietly. He did not push back. He did not know how. He just stayed still and let it happen. What came was not words. It was not language in any form he had a name for. It was feeling, arriving in sequence, the way sentences arrive, each one landing before the next begins. The first was hunger, old and deep, the kind that lives in your bones after a very long time. The second was grief, immense and exhausted, and so familiar to the creature that it barely registered as sharp anymore. Just present, the way background noise becomes part of a room. The third feeling was the one that hit him hardest. It was the specific feeling of waiting. Waiting for a long time. Waiting past the point where waiting made sense. Still waiting anyway because there was nothing else to do. He sat with those feelings for a long moment. Then he nodded once. She blinked, both eyes, slowly. Then she turned and walked back toward the deeper ruins, and he understood without being told that the conversation, such as it was finished for the day. Over the next several visits, the communication came in pieces. Not clean or easy. More like trying to read a book where some pages were missing and others were water damaged. He began keeping a written log, not in his official survey record, but in a private document on his personal device. Images she showed him. Feelings. The occasional sharp flash of something almost like memory. What he put together was this. There had been others. Not just one or two. A family. Larger creatures with wider wings and deeper voices, living inside the upper levels of the Vethrani towers, sharing the city with its people. The Vethrani had not kept them as animals. From what he could interpret, the relationship had been something closer to neighbors, partners. The dragons had used the city's upper reaches. The Vethrani had used the lower. They had coexisted for what seemed, from the feeling of it, like a very long time. Then something had happened. He could not get a clear picture of what. The feeling associated with it was a wall of white noise. Too much, too fast, compressed into something the creature did not revisit. The Vethrani were gone. The dragons dwindled. The eggs stopped hatching. The adults grew fewer, and then there were none. She had been an egg when the last adult died. She had hatched alone. Darien sat with that for a long time on the walk back to his ship one evening. He did the math. The Vethrani ruins were estimated at between 80 and 300 years old, depending on which geological survey you trusted. She had been here for somewhere in that range, alone on a dead moon, last of her kind, with no one to teach her what she was or what she was supposed to do. He started bringing better food after that. Real rations, not the emergency bars. He rigged a small thermal shelter near the column she used, just a folded heat panel propped against the stone, low to the ground. He said nothing about it, just left it there. The next morning she was sleeping inside it. He called her Suri because she made a sound like that when she finally relaxed near him, a low, soft noise that settled out of her throat when she stopped being afraid. It was the only name he had for her, and she did not seem to object. 3 weeks in, she flew. It was short and wobbly. 2 meters up, 10 meters forward, a landing that was more of a controlled crash into a pile of rubble. She sat up from the rubble looking deeply undignified. He raised both fists once, quietly, a gesture he made when something went right. She made the Suri sound. He requested a survey extension that afternoon. His mineral data was excellent. It was approved without question. He still had not told anyone about her. He was not ready to share her with a galaxy that had already lost her once. His survey period ended on a Tuesday. Darian sat in the Callaway for 6 hours before he made the call. He had written and deleted the report 4 times. Too much detail. Too little. Too clinical. Too personal. In the end, he wrote what was true in the plainest words he had, encrypted it at the highest level his credentials allowed, and sent it directly to Admiral Finna rather than through the standard submission channel. He marked the subject line, personal, not survey. Please read before anything else. Finna read it in under an hour. Her response came back in 3 minutes. It said, do not file a public log entry. Say nothing to anyone. Wait. He waited. He spent the time building a better shelter near Suri's column. 2 heat panels now, angled to trap warmth. A water recycler. A small container of the freeze-dried protein she had decided she liked. She watched him work with her head tilted and her tail wrapped around her own feet, which he had learned was what she did when she was thinking. On the 31st hour of waiting, a ship appeared on his proximity sensor. Not Finna's ship. A GBA cutter, white and narrow, with the green stripe of the Galactic Biological Authority running nose to tail. Then a second. Then a survey beacon buoy dropping into orbit, marking the entire moon as a protected biological discovery site. Finna's message arrived at the same moment the GBA ships did. It said, someone intercepted the signal. I am sorry, Darian. I am doing what I can. The name Rovazan appeared on his comm request screen 12 minutes later. He accepted it. The face that appeared was calm and professional, gray-skinned, forearmed, with the flat, wide eyes of the Thallery. He introduced himself as a field officer for the GBA Outer Reach Division. He spoke good standard trade language, precise and even. He explained that the GBA had filed an emergency jurisdiction claim over Orvith 9 and all xenobiological entities currently present on the moon's surface. He explained this with the tone of someone reading a bus schedule, thorough, unhurried, and entirely sure of himself. Darian listened to the whole thing. Then he put on his suit and walked out to the ruins. When Rovazan's team landed and crossed the dust toward him, Darian was already standing at the entrance to the deeper ruins, arms at his sides. Vazan stopped 2 meters away. Behind him, 5 field agents in GBA white waited. A 6th person stood slightly apart. A human woman with a scanner in her hand and the specific expression of someone who had just received extraordinary news and was trying not to show how excited it made her. She introduced herself as Dr. Eisel, xenobiologist. She said it quickly, like an afterthought, and then her eyes went immediately past Darian to the ruins behind him. Vazan explained the situation again, in person this time, patiently and without malice. The dragon was a Class 1 xenobiological discovery. GBA protocol required immediate transfer to a controlled study environment. It was not punitive. It was preservation. He was sure Darian understood. Darian said, no. Vazan said, you do not have legal authority to refuse. Darian said, I know that. I'm still saying no. There was a pause. Vazan studied him with the flat professional attention of someone recalibrating. He had clearly expected argument, but perhaps not quite this particular kind of argument. The simple, flat kind that did not offer a negotiating position because it was not interested in negotiating. Behind Darian, deep in the ruins, he heard nothing. Suri had gone completely quiet when the ships appeared. She was still. She was watching. He knew, without being able to explain how he knew, that she could feel the strangers, feel their presence pushing against the edges of the air the way a crowd fills a room. She trusted no one here but him. That was the only fact that mattered. Vazan informed him that the GBA would be filing for a formal access ruling through a remote tribunal. It would take approximately 72 hours. In the meantime, his team would set up an observation camp at a respectful distance and conduct non-contact survey work on the outer ruins. He was perfectly civil about it. He even offered Darian his camp's dinner supply, which Darian declined. When the GBA team moved away, Dr. Eisel lingered for a moment. She looked at Darian with an expression he could not quite read. She said, "I am not here to hurt it." He said, "Her." Eisel paused. Then she wrote something in her personal log and walked back to the GBA camp. Darian turned back toward the ruins. He walked in until he could see the pale glint of gold in the shadow of the old stones. Suri was pressed flat against the ground behind the furthest column, wings folded tight, eyes on him. He sat down in the dust between her and the way out. He did not speak. There was no point. She understood his presence better than his words anyway. The tribunal was in 72 hours. He started thinking about who he could call. He had never been good at asking for help. He had spent most of his adult life specifically arranging things so he would not need to. But Suri had hatched alone in a dead city and waited for 100 years without anyone coming. He was not willing to let the galaxy fail her a second time. He pulled out his personal comm and started going through his contact list. He had more people in there than he remembered. He started at the top and began making calls. The first call he made was to his union. The Deep Survey Workers Alliance was not a glamorous organization. It handled pay disputes and equipment insurance and occasionally argued with the Survey Corps about rest cycle regulations. It was not built for this. He called the regional rep anyway, a stocky woman named Britta who had processed his membership card 11 years ago and had a voice like gravel in a metal drum. He explained the situation in under 4 minutes. Britta said, "So they want to lock up something that can talk just because they got there with paperwork first." He said, "That is a good summary, yes." Britta said, "I will make some calls." The second call was to Petra Holt. He had met her once at a conference on Vethrani archaeology 3 years ago. She was a Xeno rights legal advocate, thin and sharp-faced, with the kind of permanent tiredness that came from spending a decade fighting cases no one else wanted to touch. She specialized in sapience law, the messy, contested legal space around alien beings who did not fit neatly into any existing category. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked 3 precise questions. Then she said she was filing an emergency petition within the hour arguing that Suri was a sapient entity and therefore not subject to GBA wildlife custody protocols. He asked if she thought it would work. She said, "Probably not fast enough, but it will slow them down and it will put their actions on record. That matters later." He made 9 more calls over the next 6 hours. Retired xenoarchaeologists who had published papers on the Vethrani. A professor of alien cognition who had spent 15 years trying to get the GBA to update its sapience criteria and had very strong opinions about the current state of affairs. A journalist named Ren who was already on the orbital station for a different story and had, in Darian's experience, never met a situation she did not want to examine closely. Ren's story ran 8 hours after his call. The headline used the word dragon. Headlines always found the right word. He did not know what was happening beyond the ruins because he refused to leave them. Britta sent him updates. The story was moving. The GBA had issued a statement describing Suri as a significant scientific discovery requiring careful professional management, which was the sort of language that made people ask what exactly they planned to manage her into. Petra's petition had been received. The retired xenoarchaeologists had written a joint letter. It was not quiet anymore. On the second day of the standoff, Suri emerged. Darian did not ask her to. He did not know she was going to. He heard the click of her feet on stone behind him and turned to see her walking past him with the careful, precise steps of a creature that had decided to do something and was committed to it. She walked out of the ruins and into the open dust. She walked past him entirely, without stopping, and continued toward the GBA camp. He followed at a distance, not sure what else to do. She stopped approximately 10 meters from the edge of the camp. 6 GBA officers, Rovazan, Dr. Eisel, all of them had frozen the moment she appeared. No one reached for equipment. No one spoke. The stillness was total. Suri sat down in the dust and looked at Dr. Eisel. Then she broadcast. Darian had felt her telepathy close up, aimed at him, careful and personal. This was not that. This was open and wide, directed at everyone present, and it hit like a wave of warm water, sudden, encompassing, impossible to refuse entry to. What she sent was an image. The ruins, but not as they were. As they had been. The towers whole and tall. The Vethrani city lit from within, their lights warm against the dark sky. Dragons in the upper levels, moving through the high spaces with their wings half spread, and below them the Vethrani people going about their lives, and between them, nothing dramatic, no ceremony, no great symbolic moment, just two kinds of people living in the same place, present to each other, aware, then dark, empty, long and wide and silent. Then a very specific small view, a man in a survey suit sitting in pale dust, not moving, not grabbing, not demanding anything, just sitting, waiting. The broadcast ended. One of the GBA officers had taken 2 steps backward without meaning to. Another was pressing the back of her hand against her mouth. Dr. Eisel had sat down on a storage crate. She was not writing anything. She was just sitting. Rovazan stood very still for a long moment. Then he turned to Darian and said nothing. There was nothing obvious to say. Suri walked back to Darian, sat at his feet, and made the low, quiet sound that meant she was no longer afraid. He did not move. He kept his eyes on the GBA camp and breathed slowly and tried to remember that winning this moment was not the same as winning the whole thing. Britta sent a message 20 minutes later. 3 separate news channels had picked up Ren's story. The GBA's regional director had issued a second statement, more carefully worded than the first. Petra said the tribunal was taking the petition seriously. He wrote back, "She spoke today." All of them heard it. Britta wrote back, "Good. Keep standing there." He kept standing there. The tribunal was in 31 hours. The tribunal was held through a relay station 3 star systems away, projected onto screens in both the Callaway and the GBA cutter. Darian sat in his pilot seat with Suri on the floor beside him. She did not like the projected screens. Something about the light frequency made her tail flick with irritation, but she stayed. 3 judges. 2 were GBA affiliated. 1 was an independent arbiter from the Outer Reach Judicial Council, a heavy-set man named Dorov who appeared to have been pulled from something else and was not entirely happy about it. He was also, Petra had noted in a message before the session, the most important person in the room. Rovazan presented the GBA's case first. He was precise and thorough. He cited the Xenobiological Discovery Protocols, sections 4 through 11. He cited the GBA's existing custody framework for previously undiscovered species. He made the argument, with complete sincerity, that taking Suri into custody was the safest possible outcome for her. Controlled environment, consistent food supply, protected from the dangers of a remote moon with no infrastructure, studied by professionals who understood her biology. He was not unkind about it. He genuinely believed it. That was the difficult part. When he finished, Petra spoke. She was brief. She said that the GBA's case relied entirely on classifying Suri as an animal. She presented 3 items. The first was Darian's detailed communication log, 61 days of documented telepathic exchanges, translated as precisely as he had been able to manage into written descriptions. The second was the testimony from the 3 retired xenoarchaeologists, who stated that the Vethrani historical record consistently depicted dragons as partners, not fauna. The third was Darian's own statement, which he had written out and which Petra read aloud without editorializing. It was not a dramatic statement. He had not tried to make it one. He had just written down what he had observed, in order, as plainly as he could. He had written about amber eyes in a ruined city. He had written about the patience of something afraid deciding, slowly, that maybe it did not need to be afraid of him. He had written about what it felt like when she pressed her nose against his palm, and he understood for the first time that this was trust, being offered to him one careful fraction at a time. He had not expected it to sound like much when Petra read it back. It sounded like more than he expected. Then Dorov, the independent arbiter, said he had a question. He asked whether Dr. Eisel would be offering testimony. There was a pause on the GBA side of the relay. Vazan's expression shifted slightly, not concern exactly, but recalculation. Dr. Eisel appeared on screen from a separate feed. She had clearly requested to speak independently. She said she would be brief. She said that following the communication event of the previous day, she could not in good scientific conscience classify the subject as non-sapient. She said this plainly, using the formal language of her field, with no visible emotion. She said that her professional evaluation was that the GBA's custody protocols were designed for animals and organisms and were categorically inappropriate for an entity demonstrating the cognitive and communicative profile she had now observed. Then she paused and said one more thing. She said, "I came here to study something extraordinary. I still want to do that, but not like this." Vazan did not respond to her testimony. He made a note on his screen. His face was professionally neutral. The tribunal recessed for 40 minutes. When Dorov came back, he did not look particularly happy, which Petra had told Darian was often a good sign. Happy arbiters were usually happy because they were giving the powerful party what it wanted. He read the provisional ruling. GBA custody was denied. The communication evidence and Dr. Eisel's testimony had introduced sufficient question about the subject's cognitive status that placing her in a custody framework designed for non-sapient organisms was legally premature. The GBA's appeal rights were preserved. The question of full legal personhood was referred to a formal sapience review process, which would be slow and contested and would take at minimum 2 years. In the interim, a joint protection order was issued. Suri would remain on Orvith 9. She could not be moved, confined, or subjected to invasive study without consent. The challenge of defining consent from a telepath was noted in the ruling as a matter requiring further legal development. Darian Cole was formally designated as the point of contact for all communications with the subject, a title that had not existed before that afternoon. Darian said nothing in response. He had already heard what he needed. He looked down at Suri. She was watching the screen with her head tilted, ears slightly forward. She had not understood the proceedings in their detail, but she had been in the room. She had felt the shape of it. When the screens went dark, she made the low, quiet sound, the one that meant she had stopped being afraid. He put his hand down near the floor. She pressed her nose against his knuckles once, brief and warm, and then turned away to look out the Callaway's forward viewport at the pale dust of Orvith 9. His survey contract was formally terminated that evening. He was, by any standard definition, unemployed. He sent Petra a short message thanking her. She wrote back saying the real work was just starting, that Sapience reviews were brutal and long, and that she would need everything in his communication logs along with anything new he collected. He wrote back, "I am not going anywhere." She wrote, "Good. Neither am I." Outside the ship, the ruins of the Vethrani city sat in the long quiet of the moon, towers broken, dust pale and still. Inside one of those towers, something ancient and alone had waited for a very long time. It was still waiting, technically, but the waiting had changed its shape. It was not empty anymore. He started a new document on his personal device. He labeled it Communications, Ongoing. He dated the first entry. Then he went to check on her food supply. 6 months later, Darian was still on Orvith 9. His days had a shape now. He woke early, when the gas giant was still low on the horizon, and its light came through the viewport in long, flat bands of amber. He checked the shelter, restocked the food container, and walked his daily grid, not for minerals anymore, but for the Orvith Archaeological Consortium, which had contracted him to do a systematic structural survey of the Vethrani ruins. The money was fair. The work suited him. He had always been better at paying attention to things quietly than at doing anything loud. He had converted one of the Vethrani structures into a workspace. A ground-floor room with 2 of the original walls still intact, the ceiling open to the sky, a folding desk in the middle with 2 monitors, and a power line running back to the Callaway. It was not comfortable exactly, but it was his. He had put a small shelf up on the least damaged wall, and on it he kept his survey maps and a spare visor and a battered datapad he had carried since his first posting. Suri was larger now, not dramatically, still small enough to curl into a tight circle when she slept, but visibly bigger than she had been in the first weeks. Her wings, when she stretched them, had a span wider than his outstretched arms. The violet at their tips had deepened. She flew almost every day, longer distances each time, the early wobbliness long gone. She had found a route that took her up through a broken arch in the tallest standing tower and out over the ruins, banking on the low-gravity air in long, slow arcs that Darian sometimes stopped work to watch. Her telepathy had grown more deliberate, less raw feeling, more shaped image and intention. She could now communicate specific things, not in words, but close enough to words that the distinction mattered less than it once had. She had started asking questions. Not in sentences, but there were requests that came with a clear implied interrogation at the end, a specific tilt to the image that meant "what is that?" or "why do you do that?" He answered them as plainly as he could. She seemed satisfied. The personhood case was moving. Slowly, like most things in interstellar law, but it was moving. Petra had 3 other alien rights organizations signed on as co-filers. 4 species groups had submitted briefs in support. The GBA's appeal had been partially declined. They could send approved observers to the ruins, but those observers had to remain outside a marked perimeter, could not bring capture equipment, and had to submit all documentation to a joint committee before publishing. Dr. Eisel was one of the observers. She came once a month, stayed for 3 days, and watched from the perimeter with her scanner. She always greeted Darian. She never tried to cross the line. On a morning in the 7th month, Suri landed on the roof of his workspace and stayed there all day. She did not come down. She did not communicate anything particular. She just sat on the broken edge of the old Vethrani stone and watched the gas giant move across the sky. Darian worked below, at his desk, running structural data. Occasionally he heard her shift, the small scratch of claws on stone, the adjustment of weight. Occasionally he heard the sound she made when she was simply content, the low resonant hum that came from deep in her chest. He brought his coffee outside in the afternoon and sat on a piece of fallen masonry below the roof's edge. She looked down at him from above. He looked up at her. They stayed like that for a while, not talking, not doing anything in particular. The gas giant was large and slow on the horizon. The dust of Orvith 9 was pale and still. 2 universities had proposed building a research station on the moon. Darian had mentioned it to Suri the week before, shown her an image of what it might look like. Buildings, people, equipment, regular ships. She had sat very still with the image. Then she had sent something back. A single long corridor. Empty. Quiet. Her own footsteps moving through it. Very small, very alone. And then, far away at the end of the corridor, not rushing in, not filling the space, a few lights. Distant. Cautious. Getting no closer unless she moved toward them first. He had written to the universities. She is open to it. Carefully. On her terms. He wrote 3 more pages of communication logs after dinner that evening. It was standard now. He filed them with Petra's team every 2 weeks, and they had become some of the most important documents in the Sapience Review. He wrote about how she had started investigating specific sections of the ruins on her own initiative, returning with objects, fragments of Vethrani carvings, that she arranged in patterns he had not decoded yet. He wrote about the morning she had woken him by landing on his roof because there was a secondary aftershock from a tectonic shift, and she had felt it before his instruments detected it. He wrote about the questions she asked. He did not look up. He heard the light, precise step of each foot finding its place. Then a small warm weight settled across the back of his neck and shoulders, heavy and comfortable, a long tail draped forward across his collarbone. He felt the slow warmth of her and the faint vibration of the hum deep in her chest, like a held note. She had decided she was comfortable enough to sleep here. He kept typing. He did not comment on it. There was nothing that needed to be said. The last dragon alive had found one particular human she considered safe, in a galaxy that had spent 300 years assuming she did not exist. That was not a small thing. He knew it was not a small thing. He also knew that the important work was not the tribunal or the legal case or the research proposals, though all of those mattered. The important work was this: being here, consistently, without demands. Being the kind of presence that could be trusted. Being the kind of creature that sat in the dust and waited. It turned out that was enough. It turned out that had always been enough. He saved the document and went to sleep at his desk with Suri still draped across his shoulders, breathing slow and warm in the cold quiet of the dead moon, while the gas giant rose again outside the open roof and filled the ruins with its long amber light.